Hello, pilgrims. I want to ask you, is the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street the greatest rock and roll record ever made? Now, I ask this because I was reading this. It's one of them 33 and a thirds books. There's a whole series of them about loads of different albums. It's written by Bill Yanovitz, 2005. Now, Bill Yanovitz was is the guitarist and guitar player in American alt rock band Buffalo Tom. They came to prominence over here in the UK in the early 90s with albums such as Let Me Come Over and Big Red Letter Day, but they were making a bit of headway. But like a lot of American bands of the early 90s that were kind of getting a foothold over here, they kind of got knocked sideways by Britpop. He also wrote this, Rocks Off, 50 tracks that tell the story of the Rolling Stones. This is great as well. He is a great writer and he loves the Stones. But I just want to read the opening of this book, right? He says, the single greatest rock and roll record of all time. Okay? Don't send me any letters and hold your calls. I can almost see you holding up and waving your Beatles records, your Pet Sounds, dusty old LPs in faded jackets, worthy contenders all, I am sure. Brilliant pop records, masterpieces even, but not the greatest, most soulful rock and roll record ever made. That is Exile on Main Street. Okay, so he makes the point of it being a rock and roll record. That's the point. That's an interesting way he's looking at it. So, let's get into the story of Exile. They had to leave the UK for tax reasons and financial reasons. They were paying 93 pence in the pound tax and they couldn't earn enough to pay the tax bill, so they left. Now, April the 5th, 1971 is the date they have to leave, the last day, because that's the final day of the tax year. And I know that Keith Richards at the time, he was going through a period of drug taking, detoxing. He left it right to the last minute, to the point that when they went into his rented house, after he'd left, there was a load of his stuff still there. He just left it, kids' toys, the lot. But it makes me laugh. He lived at number 3 Shaney Walk. Now, Shaney Walk runs parallel with the Chelsea Embankment on the river. Now, he'd rented number 3 because Mick Jagger had bought number 48 Shaney Walk, so they could be close to each other for songwriting and such. It's very wealthy part of town, It was then, it still is now. But what I find really amusing, or it makes me smile whenever I'm up there, when they moved to central London from Dartford in the early 60s, they moved to Edith Grove, that grotty flat, that cold water flat. I don't know whether you saw that exhibit a few years ago where they recreated it. Horrible. It's literally just 5 minutes walk from Shaney Walk. So from poverty-stricken unknown musicians to rock aristocracy, if you like, a massive difference from that point of view, but they'd only moved 5 minutes down the road. I just always find it always makes me smile. But Edith Grove was slightly a bit different. It was a bit different. It was a bit of a backwater. I don't know if you've seen that early publicity picture where they're all sitting on the road outside. They could do that now because it was very quiet. But now it's a main arterial route from the M4 motorway down to the river, so you can get across the bridges into South London. Okay, so they go to south of France, or Keith Richards rents that Nilcott villa in the south of France, and becomes a haven for musicians, hangers-on, drug dealers, and eventually thieves. They record in the basement with the Stones mobile. It's damp, dank. Guitars go out of tune. I think Mick Taylor said him and Keith Richards got boils because of it down there. So it was really not the greatest place to record. But I mean, all the myths that have come from it, the chaos of it. Like, I think it was either Andy Johns or Glyn Johns was waiting all night to start recording, and then he left about 2 a.m. and then at 3 a.m. when he gets home, Keith's on the phone to him saying, "Look, I want you to come back and start recording." But then you get the story from that Exile, Stones in Exile documentary where that photographer, Dominic Tall, I think, he says that Keith was up at 8:30 every morning taking his kids out, and then in the afternoon he'd start recording. So like many things, a truth somewhere probably in the middle. But what makes this record brilliant is the feel of it. It's the feel of the songs. For Keith Richards, it was always about the feel, the roll, not just the rock, the roll. And I think, and it says it, Bill Yanovitz says it in that book, Tumbling Dice is probably the archetypal Stones track because it has got an incredible feel to it. Now, it took couple of weeks of trying to get this right. I think they had 100 rolls of tape where they just kept going over it and over it and over it till they eventually got what Keith was looking for. I think even Joe Strummer has said that it's a mystical beat because it's not fast, it's not slow, and a lot of people have tried to copy it, but they just couldn't get it the way that the Stones were looking for those feels on all those tracks, and that's what makes this record different from anything else. I think at the time, it's ironic that the Yardbirds took over at the Crawdaddy Club in Richmond from the Rolling Stones, because the Yardbirds were the band that took rock and made it harder and louder. All right, moved to Led Zeppelin, and you could argue that Cream were there as well. So them two, you could have an argument about them two bands who took music to be harder and louder. Whereas the Stones, they kept always with one foot towards the rock and roll. They didn't have that, and the Yardbirds as well brought that idea in. You got a great, a great guitar player, a great instrumentalist, and they become a focus of the band. The Stones didn't have that. It was rock and roll, so they were in it together. I had Mick Taylor, he was a great player, but they didn't use him like that. And also they were no longer a five-piece band. You had Nicky Hopkins, you had Jim Price, you had Bobby Keys, and they're there on stage with them as well. They weren't hidden away like a lot of bands do. They're there on stage because it's rock and roll. They're in it together. It's a night out. It's a party when they're playing live. They never forgot that that's what it was supposed to be about, as rock and roll was back in the day, as blues was. Whenever everyone would gather in some shack somewhere on a Saturday night and be drinking and dancing and later on shagging. That's what rock and roll was, and that's what Keith is always looking for. He was back then. But there's also, I think, with this album, it's got a frayed at the edges feel to it, hasn't it? Really. Not a listlessness, because that doesn't make sense. There is a contrast between. There is this kind of, I don't know what it is. It's like that afraid at the edges feel, but the excitement of making the music. I mean, a lot of people call this album like an elegy for the 1960s, if you like, because it's because obviously the idealism of the 60s had come to nothing. I mean, a lot of that was built up by middle class critics who want music to have some kind of greater meaning, some kind of societal effect, because it makes their jobs have more substance. But I mean, with the Stones, they'd been through all them drug busts, and then of course Altamont, where there you are in front of only the Stones this would happen to, wouldn't it? Really, someone being murdered in front of the stage, and then you see how feeble, the rock star is. And Mick Jagger was useless at that point. I don't blame him. There's nothing he could do. But faced with the reality of what was going on, he could do nothing. I mean, kudos to Keith, because he did manage to retain something of his image there, the way he was dealing with that. But you see it, there's nothing they could do against that. What was going on at Altamont, nothing. So in a way, people say this is about all that, everything that went wrong and went through the 60s, and it leads to this album, and it all seeps into it. And of course, added to the production, lots of people moaned about the production. It's dark, there's things going on and off. What's that noise there? What's this? That the vocals are recorded low. That was done on purpose, apparently, to make it more exciting, because up to that point, the vocals in the 60s album, they're right there, aren't they? They're right at the top. But this album, it comes right back down. A lot of people moaned about it. It's murky. I mean, Keith Richards called it the first grunge record, and I see what he's saying, but and it all plays into it, and all the songs have got a quality, and I think Bill Yanovitz makes the point, like something like Casino Boogie. It's a great track, and it's not that much different from something like Silver Train from Goat's Head Soup. No, I like Silver Train, but Casino Boogie's got a quality to it. It's just there. You can't quantify it. You can't say, well, it's because of this. It's just there. And I think a lot of it just comes from all that went into what had come before, and all the people that were there and the situation they found themselves in. It just created this moment, and that's what makes it unique. And I can understand why he would say it's the greatest rock and roll record, but it's unique as well. It's not Little Richard, and it isn't Chuck Berry. You can hear it in that, but they've taken what they've learnt of rock and roll, and they've ended up with this. But when people say, about an album, oh, it's not, you know, the next Stones album, it's not Exile on Main Street. Of course it isn't. They're never going to be able to replicate it. This album comes from the fact it's about the timing, it's about where they were, it's the people involved, and it all worked. It all worked, and of course they can never replicate it. It's totally unique. So yeah, it is the greatest rock and roll record ever made. But it's so unique, there's nothing else like it. Even they couldn't replicate it. So yeah, so that's it. Okay, that's it. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time.